It's Ash from Super Videos, back for another one. We're back to talk about Season 10 of The Walking Dead, specifically the bonus episodes for Season 10, which run through Season 10 Episode 17, all the way to Season 10 Episode 22. And in this video, we're actually going to look at the bonus episode table read for Season 10 Episode 22, the final episode in the bonus bundle, which is called Here's Negan. Obviously, this is the Negan-centric episode, which will obviously be adapting to some extent the standalone comics of the same name, Here's Negan. I don't know about anyone else, but this is probably one of the bonus episodes that I'm most excited for. So we're going to look at the table read and we're going to talk about it, and I'm going to use the table read to make some predictions about what we're potentially going to see in that episode. And based on what we have in the table read, it seems like they're actually going to be remixing a pretty huge component of the Here's Negan comic storyline, which actually, one, surprised me, and two, excited me about what they might be doing in this episode. So stay tuned, we'll be right back to break it all down. Alright, so before we get into this, as always, if you are not a subscriber and if you enjoy the content by the end, consider subscribing to join our community, and also make sure to share and smash the like button if you do enjoy the content. And of course, make sure to press the bell to be notified about uploads on the channel. Of course, they have released other table reads for the bonus episodes. I think they released one for all of the episodes, and this was the only one that they haven't released yet, which makes sense because it's the final one. We have covered the bonus episode table reads for the other episodes. You can go and check it out, and I'm gonna follow the same recipe as I have done for the other ones, where I'm not gonna go through the table read itself because it would be a waste of time in a way. So what I will do is run through kind of the general idea of what was in the table read, and then talk more specifically about each component or each section of the table read. And in this case, there's actually quite a lot to talk about. So let's not waste any more time, let's dive right into it. So the first thing I want to talk about is actually the people that are in this table read. So we not only have Jeffrey Dean Morgan himself, who obviously plays Negan, but we also have Jeffrey Dean Morgan's real life spouse, Hilarie Burton Morgan, playing his on-screen wife, Lucille. For those of you who may not know, Negan didn't just call his baseball bat wrapped in barbed wires Lucille. He named her Lucille because his wife's name was Lucille. And we are obviously gonna see what happened to her in this bonus episode. But it is very, very interesting, like I've said before, that they cast Jeffrey Dean Morgan's wife to play Negan's wife Lucille in the show. So that's extremely interesting. But other than Jeffrey Dean Morgan and Hilarie Burton Morgan, who play Negan and Lucille, we also have two newcomers, Rodney Rolland and Miles Mussenden. I hope I'm pronouncing his last name right, but I don't recognize them from anything. I haven't seen them in anything else, like in any of their other work, so I can't really comment on the casting itself, but they're obviously gonna be making an appearance in this episode. It might be in the current timeline, it might also be in one of the flashbacks that we see, because obviously this episode being Negan's backstory episode, we're gonna see a lot of flashbacks about Negan. So these two actors might be playing a character in one of the flashbacks. But other than them, we also do have Lauren Cohan and Melissa McBride on the table read, which means that Maggie and Carol will also have some sort of a scene in this episode. So that's extremely interesting. Now, based on the table read and the fact that Maggie and Carol are going to be in this episode, that leads me to think that this episode will also have a tie-in to the events of issue 174 of the comics. I'll leave a thumbnail of the cover of this issue on the screen so you can see what I'm talking about, but in that particular issue, we actually have Maggie confronting Negan. Now, obviously, they did that to an extent in Season 9, Episode 5, which was the last episode Maggie was on before she returned in Season 10's finale, or the regular finale, Season 10, Episode 16. So I doubt that they're gonna do that again. So that leads me to think that they're gonna do like a variation of that in this episode. I'll talk more about that in a little bit, but I feel like the fact that Carol and Maggie are gonna be in this episode And based on what was in the actual table read, that leads me to think that we're going to see a variation of that particular scene from the comics. Not the exact scene because they already kind of did that, but a variation of it. So that's extremely interesting. But with all of that said, let's run through what happens in this table read. So this table read actually starts off with Negan. We have Negan, he's sitting by a fireplace, actually much like what was in issue 174 that I just mentioned. And then Negan looks back and then he sees his leather jacket on a chair. Now, it's unclear whether he's hallucinating or whether his leather jacket is actually there, but it could be. I mean, he does have his leather jacket at this point, I think, but it could also be a hallucination. Not totally sure. But he looks at his leather jacket, and then at that moment, he says, little pig, let me in. Which is obviously one of his infamous sayings from before. I think he said that the first time when he went to Alexandria the first time. So that's where that's coming from. But then right after he does that, his eyes begin to tear up, which is interesting. And that's when we actually get the flashback. But before we talk about the flashback, one thing I want to mention is the fact that we have Negan by himself in this particular scene that they're describing in the table read leads me to think that this may in fact be after Negan is exiled or something along those lines, because I don't see any other reason why Negan would be by himself in a location like that. I mean, he could be back at Alexandria or something, but I don't know, the way they describe this particular moment leads me to think that Negan is by himself and this could be after he's exiled. So that leads me to think that maybe the way Maggie and Carol are going to tie into this scene is that they're going to have some sort of a scene before that with him that's going to end with Negan getting exiled and going off by himself. And that's going to lead to this scene, which is Negan sitting by a fireplace by himself and then looking back at his past. And then we're going to get his backstory through these flashbacks that we're going to see. I could be wrong about that, but that's just the vibe I'm getting. But let's go back to the flashback. The flashback takes us to 12 years prior to where we are right now. So that's interesting. I'll come back to that, so keep that in mind. The next thing we see is Negan, obviously a younger Negan, in what seems to be a basement bunker. Obviously this is during the apocalypse, because in the table read, they say that he's looking outside and there's shadows of walkers passing by. So there's definitely zombies outside or walkers outside. So this is not taking place before everything went down as far as the apocalypse goes. So that's interesting. Keep that in mind as well. But what happens is that based on what they described in the table read, it looks like Negan has some sort of a generator or something, and then there's a fridge there in the basement. He goes to the fridge, grabs bags of chemotherapy medicine, which obviously ties in with his wife's illness. For those of you who might not know, Lucille, Negan's wife, had cancer. So that's how that kind of connects. But then, the next thing we see is Lucille herself showing up. She's wearing some sort of a wig, and obviously the wigs connect to her cancer as well, because she's keeping wigs, because obviously she's lost her hair because of the chemotherapy. And then the scene goes into a conversation between Negan and his wife Lucille about the walkers outside and what to do, what not to do in terms of how to basically distract them and get them to walk away and everything like that. That conversation kind of turns into Negan's state of mind and the fact that he's slowly kind of losing his mind, or maybe he is not his old self or something along those lines. And then that scene, based on the table read, ends with Lucille giving Negan a kiss. So that's the end of the scene based on the table read. Now let's talk about the details, because obviously the devil is in the details, especially in an episode like this. So there's a few very interesting things going on. The first thing is that this takes place 12 years prior to where we are right now. So this takes place during early days of the apocalypse. Just like the comics, the events of Here's Negan. But unlike the comics and the Here's Negan story from the comic book, it seems like they're remixing the story a little bit, because in the comics, in Here's Negan, they revealed to us that Lucille was in a hospital bed with Negan right by her side in the early days of the apocalypse. And she died because of her cancer in hospital. And then things happened after that, which I don't want to get into right now, just in case people haven't read the issue. But unlike that storyline, it seems like in the TV show adaptation, they're gonna remix it and have Lucille survive for much longer and actually survive alongside Negan as everything is going down. So that's extremely interesting. So this is, I would say, a pretty big remix. Now they could have variations of what was already in the Here's Negan the same way, but one of the biggest aspects of Here's Negan was the fact that we didn't really see Lucille a lot. We just saw her for a little bit. So it seems like they're gonna change that a bit and have Lucille not only survive for much longer, but actually have died more recent than it was the case in the comic book, which is extremely interesting. So that means that they will most certainly change the way Negan joins the Saviors as a byproduct of Lucille surviving longer, which is extremely interesting. Like I said, it may be a similar storyline, but it might be different enough to a point where it's noticeable. For example, unlike the comics where Negan joined the Saviors before the Saviors actually became a thing, in the show it might be the case where the Saviors may have already been a thing, and then Negan found them after, when Lucille died. So that could be one of the bigger changes that they do afterwards. That means that the aftermath of Lucille's death may be slightly altered or remixed, which is also very interesting. And like I said earlier, the fact that Maggie and Carol will be involved in this episode, what may end up happening is Negan and Carol and Maggie may have a scene together that, like I said earlier, may lead to Negan being exiled, leading to the scene where we have him thinking about his past, hence the flashbacks and all of that, which would obviously give us snippets of Negan's backstory. What's very apparent is that we're most likely not going to see the exact same story as the comics, because enough things are different about it to a point where it seems like its own kind of thing, if that makes sense. And we're obviously not going to get the story that we got in the comics in terms of following Negan before everything went bad, and through that learning who he was, what type of person he was, what he did, unless this scene in the table read is not where things pick up right away and we actually get flashbacks before this, which might be more similar to what happened in the comics. Then in that case, we would kind of still get the same kind of storyline. But at the same time, what is very clear is that they're going to be remixing this story because, like I said, Lucille survives for longer than she did in the comics. But that's pretty much everything that I wanted to discuss in this video. I hope everyone enjoyed this talk. It was a little longer than I expected. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to share and smash the like button. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing to join our community if you enjoyed the content by clicking the subscribe button on the bottom right corner, and also make sure to press the bell to be notified when we upload on the channel. That's enough of me talking. I've talked way too much. Share your thoughts and opinions down in the comment section below. That's it for this video. See you next time for another super video.